What if the fairy tale wasn't a fairy tale at all, but a carefully scripted illusion that started long before the world was watching? That's the question that refuses to go away, because the deeper you dig into the story of Meghan Markle, the more it begins to feel less like a love story and more like a strategy, a pattern, a sequence of moves so precise, so calculated that critics like Piers Morgan have spent years insisting this isn't coincidence, this is design. And it all begins with something small, almost too small to notice. A single moment in 2004 that now feels like the first crack in a much bigger picture. A young actress walks into an audition room in Los Angeles, unknown, unproven, desperate. The question comes, simple, standard, unavoidable, are you a member of the union? The answer, yes. Confident, direct, unshaken. Except it wasn't true. She wasn't a member, she didn't have the card, she had no business being in that room. But she said it anyway, and somehow the system bent around her. She got the job. The lie didn't end her chances, it launched them. And that's where the whispers begin. Because according to critics, that moment wasn't just a mistake, it was a blueprint, a signal, a quiet introduction to a pattern that would follow her for decades. But that wasn't the only thing that changed, because somewhere along the way, Rachel disappeared. Yes, Rachel, that was the name. The real one, the one from childhood, the one from school, the one that quietly faded into the background while Meghan stepped forward. Now, actors change names all the time. That's not unusual. But this felt different, more deliberate, more symbolic, as if one identity had to vanish so another could rise. Rachel was ordinary, Meghan was not. And suddenly, the story starts to shift. Because when you begin rewriting names, how long before you start rewriting everything else? The childhood narrative? That changed too. The world was told a story, humble beginnings, struggle, a determined young woman climbing her way up against the odds. It was compelling, emotional, perfect. But then the details started surfacing. Her father, not absent, but deeply involved. A respected professional, a man who didn't just support her dreams, he financed them. Private education, industry access, time spent on professional sets from a young age. This wasn't the outside-looking-in story that had been sold. This was someone already inside the machine. So why erase that? Why reshape the narrative? Why cut off the very person who helped build the foundation? The timing, critics say, is everything. Because just as the royal chapter was about to begin, the past started disappearing. And then comes the claim that changes everything. The blind date. That soft romantic idea. Two strangers. One simple question. Is he nice? It sounds like something out of a movie. But behind the scenes, the timeline tells a different story. Photos, connections, social circles that overlap a little too perfectly. Reports suggesting she wasn't unfamiliar with Prince Harry at all, but had been orbiting the same elite environments long before that first meeting ever happened. So was it really chance? Or was it positioning? Because if you map it out carefully, it begins to look less like fate and more like strategy. And once she entered the royal world, the contradictions didn't stop, they multiplied. Publicly, the image was warmth, compassion, empathy, a modern duchess redefining tradition. But privately, a different tone began to emerge, staff departures, reports of tension, stories that didn't quite match the polished public persona. One moment, she's the symbol of kindness. The next, insiders are whispering about something else entirely. So which version is real? That's the question that keeps coming back. And then everything explodes on the global stage. The interview, the moment that froze the world. Emotional, raw, unfiltered, claims that shook the institution to its core. A secret wedding before the official one. Decisions framed as deeply personal, deeply painful. But then the corrections start. Statements, clarifications, quiet contradictions that begin to chip away at the narrative, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make people pause. And once you start pausing, you start questioning. Because if one detail doesn't hold, what about the rest? And right in the middle of all this, something else quietly disappears. Her digital past, the blog, the posts, the voice she once used to express herself, gone. Wiped clean, almost overnight, as if a version of her life had been carefully edited out of existence. But fragments remain. Archive traces that paint a slightly different picture. More ambition, more awareness, more intention than the public story ever suggested. And suddenly, it all starts connecting. The early lie, the name change, the rewritten childhood, the carefully crafted romance, the shifting public image, the disappearing past. Individually, they're just moments, but together, they form a pattern. A pattern that critics say points to something much bigger, because this isn't just about one story anymore, it's about control. Control of narrative, control of perception, control of reality itself. And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to ignore, because maybe the real question isn't what happened. Maybe the real question is what hasn't been revealed yet. And why does it feel like the biggest piece of this puzzle is still being kept just out of sight? And just when it feels like you've seen the full picture, something darker, something far more calculated begins to surface. Because this isn't just about rising to fame anymore, it's about maintaining power at any cost. And the clues become sharper, harder to ignore, but almost uncomfortable in how consistently they point in the same direction. Critics like Piers Morgan didn't just question isolated incidents, they started connecting dots. And one of the most explosive claims he ever made wasn't about behavior, it was about originality. He openly suggested that Meghan Markle had built an entire public persona by borrowing, reshaping, and representing ideas that were never fully her own, and at first it sounded outrageous, even unfair, until people started checking. A speech at the United Nations, praised globally, suddenly felt less groundbreaking when similarities to historical speeches emerged. A podcast concept, a children's book, even creative projects, each one quietly linked by critics to something that existed before, something that looked just a little too familiar. And that's when the narrative shifts again, because now it's not just about reinvention, it's about replication, about curating brilliance rather than creating it, about understanding what works and stepping into it seamlessly enough that no one questions the origin. And if that's true, then the bigger question becomes, what else was curated? Because while the public saw empowerment, independence, and authenticity, insiders began whispering about something very different, something far less polished. Reports surfaced about staff turnover that wasn't just high, it was alarming. Names came and went, quietly exiting, rarely speaking publicly, but leaving behind a pattern that was impossible to ignore. And when fragments of those experiences leaked, they painted a picture that didn't align with the global image at all. Words like demanding, cold, even intimidating began appearing in conversations that were never meant to be public. And suddenly, the contrast became impossible to dismiss. The compassionate figure on stage versus the alleged reality behind closed doors. And then there's the moment that critics point to as the ultimate breaking point of trust. The media deals, the promises, the expectations that came with massive contracts. The Spotify deal alone, worth millions, was supposed to redefine influence, to establish a powerful new voice in global conversations. But what followed raised more questions than answers. Reports suggested that not all the work was being done personally, that interviews were pre-recorded, edited, assembled in a way that blurred the line between authenticity and production, and when the partnership ended abruptly, the criticism wasn't subtle, it was direct, even brutal, with insiders questioning the effort behind the outcome. And this is where the pattern tightens, because it's no longer about isolated decisions, it's about a consistent approach, control the narrative, control the output, control the perception, no matter what happens behind the scenes. But if you think that's where the controversy peaks, it doesn't, because there's one chapter that continues to divide opinion more than anything else, one topic that even the harshest critics approach carefully, not because it lacks impact, but because of how explosive it is. The birth of Archie. The secrecy. The deviations from tradition. For generations, royal births followed a strict, transparent protocol, medical confirmations, public announcements, visible processes designed to eliminate doubt. But this time, things were different. Details were limited. Information was tightly controlled. And in that silence, speculation grew. Observers pointed out inconsistencies, moments that didn't align with expectations, questions that never received clear answers. And while none of it has been definitively proven, the absence of clarity became a story in itself, fueling debates that refuse to fade. Even careful researchers have acknowledged the gaps, the unanswered questions that sit uncomfortably in a system built on tradition and verification. And whether those gaps mean anything or nothing, the effect is the same. The doubt lingers. And when doubt enters a story this powerful, it doesn't just stay in one place, it spreads, touching every part of the narrative, forcing people to reconsider everything they thought they understood. Because now, every past decision looks different, every carefully crafted moment feels more deliberate, more intentional, more controlled. The early career choices, the relationships that ended just as new ones began, the shift from one life to another with almost surgical precision, the transformation from extras to duchess to global brand, it all starts to feel less like evolution and more like execution. And yet, despite all of this, despite the criticism, the contradictions, the questions that keep stacking up, one thing remains undeniable: control of the story has never truly slipped. Because even now, even as critics dig dig, as journalists revisit old details, as new theories emerge, the full picture remains just out of reach, carefully managed, carefully protected. And that's what makes this story so compelling, so frustrating, so impossible to ignore, because it's not just about what we know, it's about what we're not allowed to fully see. Every answer seems to open another question. Every revelation feels incomplete. And just when it seems like the truth is about to come into focus, something shifts, something changes, something pulls it back into the shadows again. So what is the reality behind the image? Is this the story of a woman unfairly scrutinized by a relentless system, or the story of someone who mastered that system so completely that the line between truth and narrative disappeared entirely? The evidence can be read both ways depending on where you stand, and that's exactly what keeps the debate alive, louder than ever. Because in the end, this isn't just about a person or a title or even a royal family. It's about perception, about power, about how easily reality can be reshaped when the right story is told at the right time. And if there's one thing that becomes clear after tracing every detail, every contradiction, every carefully placed move, it's this: whatever the truth may be, we are still only seeing the version that has been chosen for us, and the part that hasn't been revealed yet might be the one that changes everything.